Welcome to Wildspire. You get to be a fly on the wall for my intimate conversations with entrepreneurs who are changing the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Benedetto, coach, storyteller, and unmarketer at The Awakened Business, helping coaches and change-making entrepreneurs unleash their inspired message and share it with playful unmarketing. I'll ask curious questions and explore uncharted waters with my guest today. Anything can happen when we step into the unknown of infinite creativity, and that's where we're going to play. I absolutely love talking to people of varying perspectives as we look in the same direction. And that's what I am so pleased to have been able to do in this conversation with Julie and Tash Lewin, a mother-daughter duo. We talk about the energy of thought, the frequency of beingness, and humans as both transmitters and receivers. It is truly a magical conversation. Julie and her daughter, Tash Lewin, are thought leaders in conscious business and passionate about doing business without the hustle by incorporating more co-created magic into the process. They've created a Lightcode card deck and digital resource library of clearings, meditations, and energy healing templates. These resources are specifically created to help business owners and entrepreneurs navigate their own self-sabotage patterns, and for coaches, consultants, and practitioners to help their clients navigate the growth edge resistance that inevitably comes up. Working one-on-one for deeper accelerated inner work, Julie and Tash raise the energetic frequency of their clients so they can be high-frequency conduits for new earth solutions that bring about world change. It is their passion and mission, and they make it fun. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Julie and Tash Lewin. Welcome, Julie and Tash, to the Wildspire podcast. I think, yes, this is my first podcast with two people at once, two guests. So this is awesome. And a mother-daughter duo, no less. So I'm very excited about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Julie.
We're excited too. I'm Tash.
Awesome. So let me see. What would I like to say about the two of you? So I stumbled upon your information through podcast guests when I was looking for people who might be potential guests on this podcast. And I believe I recognized your names and from the Facebook group that we were both members of. And I looked at your website and I read through it. And that's what I'm looking for in that is like a feeling, right? Like just like feeling, is this someone I'd like to have a conversation with?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, I want to talk to you. And you have some really cool stuff going on. And even though we may have different languaging around it or different ways of expressing some of these things, I felt that there's a synergy, like we're looking in the same direction around, as we had spoken, raising consciousness of people, helping people to have more freedom in their life and more joy. So as we begin, tell me about what you're seeing, what you're exploring in energetic frequency, because I know this is central to what you're doing with clients and also with the products that you have available. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. And so I think for me, and I've been in this arena for 37 years, it's been about straddling the physical realm and the metaphysical realm and discovering along that way that we're actually all frequency, like we're not solid, we're actually all these little things that are moving. And I particularly, we get information, we say, yes, I know that. But when you really know it at that deep, deep level, that's when it takes on a whole new meaning. And I did the 10-day Vipassana retreat, the silent retreat, 20 years ago. And in that retreat, the teacher guided me to go as deep as I could within my being. So that's inner. And what I said to her was, oh my gosh, there's space and there's like nothing is solid. And she just smiled at me. She did not say anything. She just smiled and nodded her head. And I thought, I actually have got it. There is so much space within us, but there's a frequency. Everything is vibrating. And so from there, I went on and started working with what does that mean? And and then I studied with Dr. Kelly at the IMHS Institute or University. It's a metaphysical university. And he talked about our energy signature. And I thought, wow, I haven't heard about that concept. So we have a frequency that is like our thumbnail, our thumbprint, or, you know, it's as unique to us as it is our thumbprint. And that is a frequency, and it's looking for matches that resonate at a similar frequency. And that's how you probably read our information, and there was an energy match. It was a frequency match, and you went, oh, I think I want to speak with these ladies. And so when you start exploring at that level, you start to realize so much about your life that makes sense. Like walking into a room and you go, oh, I don't think I like that person, but you've never met that person. It's a frequency that your frequency is meeting somewhere in space, and it's going, no, that's not a match for me, and it repels you. So there's this attraction and repelling with frequency that I find quite fascinating. And that's where we like to explore, is what's in the attraction and what's in the repulsion of the unseen.
Let me ask you something that comes up for me as you're talking about this. So yes, of course I have experienced that, like a feeling about someone right away of either like, wow, they're really cool, I want to talk to them, or maybe not so much, I'm not so drawn. And when I sit with someone, and I could say anyone, and I'm really listening, like I drop into a place of just really being with someone, it's like all of that, the static, I almost want to call it the noise or the static of personality that I'm suspecting is probably what I was responding to, sort of begins to, it may still be there, but it's not so compelling anymore. And there's something deeper that I'm beginning to connect with them. It's like I've found in the last, I want to say like year and a half, that it's possible for me to have this deep connection with anyone. And when I am in that place, it has less to do with what's happening with them than it does with me. And it's like falling in love, and it's so beautiful. And it's what's made coaching even more amazing to me, because it's like every time I get to listen like that, I have the opportunity to fall in love with someone, with the deepest someone, the someone in them that is also the someone in me, with a capital S. So I'm wondering, what do you see about that? Because I get a little tripped up when I start thinking about frequencies and things and matching. And so I'd just love to see what your perspective is on that.
I can go. So when I think about like the logistics, and you're like, oh, well, what do I need to, how do I need to match with the person that I'm doing? Like, I think that's the thinking brain, and it's like dropping out of the thinking brain about it and just the being person, and like you drop into the being and into the heart. You're like, okay, well, I just can be with this person, and if there's a match there. But I guess when we are looking at frequency matching, we're not looking at it from a like a matchmaking perspective, like that you're out there trying to find a match in frequency, but rather a way of self-inspecting and an investigation that if there's things in your life that you don't like, that you don't want in your life, but they keep coming back to you, that there must be a matching frequency in you that is drawing that to you, and that can be changed. Like that you can change that frequency so that it's not. And it's not like that you're consciously going, well, I want these bad or good situations to come to me, but rather there's something deeper happening at your energetic level, like unconscious, subconscious, if you want to refer to it like that, that is bringing that energetic match. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Like you don't have to go, well, this is my energy, so therefore I'm always going to attract these things. Like those are things that you can change and adjust. And as you start to have self-awareness about yourself, you're like, okay, well, what else is going on underneath this surface level stuff? Like what's the deeper things that I'm not either not wanting to look at or that I need different things about? So we look at like the attraction and repelling kind of in that way of like what's coming into my life, and do I want different things to come into my life, and how do I do that, I guess.
Yeah. I like I mean, I see more and more how my experience that I'm having with my thoughts and the way I'm feeling about them is creating what I see in the world, is creating my reality in ways that I'm sure I can't even comprehend. And it's funny to me because I've started to, when I talk to people, sometimes I feel like, oh my God, you really live in a different world than me. They'll say like, I keep meeting men who are like this. I'm like, seriously? Because I don't know any men like that in my life. All the men in my life are like this. Or like everybody's so angry all the time. And I'm like, really? I see, like I mean, sure, sometimes I see people, but no, I would never say everybody's angry in the world out there. And her, like, and it's so striking because it's so different that it clues me into, oh, that's the reality they're creating inside of themselves. And of course it's what they're seeing. So I think, is that kind of what you're saying with frequency?
Absolutely
100%.
What I'm thinking. And like what you're resonating at is then the reality you live in. Like is the experience, all of the experiences match that kind of resonance. And so I have the same thing when I talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I only meet this sort of person that like treats me poorly. I'm like, well, just don't do that then. Like just change that. Like you can change that. Like you don't have to. I guess when people get stuck in that, well, this is the way that it is, and this is the way that it always will be. And I'm like, well, no, because you're in control of that. Like we are a meat suit for our spirit, and spirit can do whatever it wants. So just direct your meat suit to have a different experience. I guess I'm very bossy with spirit.
Yes, that's a lovely way to think about it. Like my meat suit. Hey, meat suit, do this.
A different experience. We don't have to have this poor one anymore. But yes, exactly what you said, and is exactly my experience with people. They're like, oh, I didn't, and I guess online really clues you into that when you see people having certain arguments or certain robust discussions, like, oh, I had no idea that you lived that kind of reality, like that's your reality, that we all live such different lives, but different realities within that life. That I find fascinating.
That actually draws me, Tash, to my construct of we're a fractal of the universe. There's too much evidence that is within our physical, in our meat suit. There's too much evidence that we are a duplicate of something else in the universe. And I've got a photo which I will share. It's of the universe. It's of the neurons in the brain, and it's of the World Wide Web. It's the interconnection of the World Wide Web. They look identical. So you've got the universe, all the nebulas, all the galaxies, all the what have yous, and the neurons in the brain. You look at that and you go, but that's the same thing. And then they've got the World Wide Web all connected up, and it looks very similar. So that got me thinking about fractals, and fractals are mathematical art that kind of duplicate themselves and get smaller and smaller and bigger. And so the concept that we are in an entire universe within this body really resonates with me, that even though we're humans, individuals, and they say, well, we're on this planet Earth, when I meet people and discuss things with them, I go, your world is different to my world. So we all live in our own world because we have everything in the universe within us. Have you ever thought about that?
You know that I have not thought about it in this way, but what I have, it seems to me that when I sit with it, and it doesn't make sense to my logical mind, but I'm like, oh, what is that quote by Walt Whitman? You know, I am, gosh, what is it? He says, I contain universes, you know, and it seems to me that this, there is no outer. You know, there really is none. And it's funny because I had an experience not too long ago, a few weeks ago, where I really dropped into the space in a way that I hadn't before, but I was talking from it. So it was like I saw that. I always knew that I was my best self when I was in the state of being, when I was present, right? But I was listening to a mentor and he said, my best self is the state of being. And I went, wait, what? My best self is the state of being? And so I was kind of talking in a group through that, and I dropped into it and I went, whoa, me is the state, the being is that's the real me. Like that's me. And it was like I could see through a prism almost, like, and I could like answer questions. And someone asked me, so what do you think about your best self now? And I just started laughing. I was like, what's not my best self? Like everything is the best. It just is, like, this is it. But I knew what she was asking and I could zoom out. It was sort of like zooming out or zooming in and going, but I'll tell you, Stephanie has an experience of herself when she is in a state of being and presence. She'll have an experience that we might call her best self, but that's not Stephanie's best self. She's always her best self. Like, what do you mean? And it was so interesting. And so I had this sense of like inner and outer being one. And it's very hard to talk about without feeling very strange, but that's sort of what I'm hearing. And also there's a world of the psyche as well, like that we create our own world inside of ourselves and the way that we see it through our beliefs and our values and things. And I don't know how it is that we are also creating the world that we see. I'm certain that we are at least creating the meaning, but it seems far beyond that. Like the meaning is entirely up for grabs, but it's got to be beyond that because there's this co-creation that happens, right? And that's the matching I think that you're speaking to is that's that, like the universe conspires to help you create whatever it is, whether we're conscious of it or not, that we're being, that we're asking for, right? Can you tell me more about that? Like, what does that bring up for you guys?
So I think I find it interesting, the idea that it's not even the things that you want, but it's everything that you're thinking about. So whether like the universe doesn't know that you're going, well, I don't want that thing. Like whatever you're focusing on and you have energy towards, the universe is like, okay, here you go. here's a matching experience for you. They're like, no, but I said I didn't want it. Like, okay, so it's like, where do I focus my attention, and where do I like create like laser focus if it's something that I want sooner? And so I guess it depends like what your levels of experience are and where you kind of go to. Like some people are still only at the mental level, and so thinking about it does do that same work. Like you're thinking about your thoughts and like the beliefs that you have, and shifting the beliefs and changing those if they no longer serve you. But you can kind of go up a level as well to the energy of those thoughts, and looking, that's where we're talking about the frequency of them, that there's like layers to the beliefs, that a lot of the mindset work we've found are looking at the mental state of that, like the thought state of that. And we, in our work, really also want to look at the energetic frequency of those thoughts and where that might be sitting in the physical body. And, oh my God, and like shifting those frequencies as well, and that it can make then the changing of the thoughts faster if they don't serve. If you're like, well, I'm attracting these experiences in this like life that I'm living, but it doesn't feel good anymore. Like it's no longer what I want. But how do I get the things that I do want? How do I make those different choices when like the words that I'm saying are, but I want these new things, but deep within you, there is still the resonance and even still the thoughts that kind of bubble up of like, well, I don't deserve that, or I'm not good enough to have that, or I'm not worthy of those things that I want. And like, it's addressing all of those things. And now I've gone on a tangent and I don't remember what you asked.
Well, I don't remember either, Tash, so that's perfect.
Cool. Oh my goodness.
But that did bring something up for me, Tash, that I really absolutely love, because people say, well, how do I know if that shift has happened? How do I know that that work that you say that I've done or you've done with me is permanent? And how you know is by how you respond unconsciously in a similar situation in the future, if that makes sense. So, for example, if when somebody is, what's a good example? If somebody is wanting you to take responsibility for their stuff, or there might be an argument, and they're saying, well, that's your fault. And you can then in that moment go, check in, is this my stuff? And then go, no, that's not my stuff. Then you don't own what that person is projecting at you, and you can be really calm in the heated moment and go, no, that's not my stuff. I'll let you deal with that. And you're able to walk away or hang up the phone without there being a corresponding charge coming back to that person, where then what happens is it escalates and it goes up and up. And that's where screaming matches happen. That's where, domestic violence, physical violence happens when it escalates. But when you can, because you can unconsciously do that, it's an autonomic response of, is this my stuff? No. I'll just hand that back. And you don't even have to physically say it. You just energetically hand it back, and it defuses the situation, because there's not a match for their charge to work with. And so it's all internal for them, and there's no power given to, like, it's not drawing power externally to create that vortex of escalation. And we hear that often when people actually get something about themselves And then in the future, they'll come and tell us a story and they'll go, oh, well, XYZ happened. And we go, yeah, right there, that's your evidence that that shift is permanent. Because anyone can do strategy, but it's when you're in your heart or in your beingness, that's when you operate autonomically. That's when you just do it. Like, I don't say, if I want to reach out and touch that flower there, I don't say arm, move, hand open, touch flower. You don't do that. That's what autonomic is. So when you do something autonomically in response to a situation, that means that that's at your core. That's what your resonance is. And that's how you see your evidence that you've been able to shift something within you when you respond in a different way to an age-old situation that you've always responded with ABC, but now you're responding with XYZ. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know, what I've been seeing in both with myself and also with clients in transformation and in creating shifts around whatever. Sometimes I know what's happening and sometimes I really don't, because like a real shift, like when the world looks different to me, a whole mess of other things change. And I might not even notice until I go, wait a second, this used to freak me out and it doesn't freak me out anymore.
Correct.
There's nothing direct that I can point to that said, like, I didn't work on a thing about, for example, I used to have a lot of travel anxiety, a lot. And a few years ago, I left my home in New York and started traveling and pet sitting. And I still had a fair degree of travel anxiety. It was decreasing. But at a certain point, I just didn't worry anymore. Like I used to have to go over in my head all the things that I need to do and blah, 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 and I just stopped doing that. And I noticed like, or driving. Driving was very stressful for me, especially someone else's vehicle. And I noticed, I'm not carrying that stress. Now, in a moment of insecurity, lower energy, sometimes that's still like I notice it a little more, but not at all like I used to. And I never sat there and like I didn't clear limiting beliefs about it or put any intention on that. Something shifted. And what I've seen is that it almost seems like sometimes it just happens like that. And sometimes it's more of a bubbling up to awareness. So I may not be able to, like, it may still look real that I should feel anxious when I'm driving. Like that may still come up, that kind of anxious thinking and feeling, and I may still buy it, but I'll see myself doing it and I'll go, oh, that's what's, instead of just getting swept away and like, oh my God, I can't drive this car. What am I going to do? You know, and I sing when I'm anxious, as you know. I'll go, oh, there's that thing. And it doesn't go away. And I'm still kind of messing with it. It's still hanging out, but it's not so compelling. It's like the shift is happening. It's just not immediate. Do you see that too? Or is there something like that you would,
And also, I think in that moment, you become the witness, like the observer. So you come up. And the more that you can be coming up and observing yourself behaving in certain ways, then the more you realize that like your mind chatter is separate from who you are, like your soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, like that there is a separation and that all of these thoughts and anxieties and stuff aren't necessarily who we are, as we believed for like 100 years, like that's who we were. But you can, the more you jump up and out and observe it, then the faster you can get on the other side of that anxiety, like on the other side of that thought. You're like, no, this isn't who I am. I don't have to do this anymore. But it's in those moments, it can be challenging to come up into the observer. So I like seeing that evidence of like you becoming the witness of your own stuff. like in that moment of anxiety, and that seeing that more and more frequently. And so that's when the shift isn't like a lightning bolt. That's when it's like a summer rain, when it's just like, or a spring rain where it's a little lighter, maybe not such a downpour in Australia. Summer rain is quite brutal, but it's like a dripping effect where like you become more and more and more conscious of the patterns to your thoughts, and that you can rise above and you can see the pattern for what it is, not who you are.
Yeah. I talk about a lot with clients the power of just noticing, and that's it. Without even, it doesn't even require a meditative state. It's like once you're onto it, you're onto it. And if you can just begin to notice, like in conversation like we are right here, we can notice it. We can slow down, we can kind of be more present and notice. In your life, in your everyday life, it's more likely that you notice, and then you begin to notice faster. One of my clients said to me, like, I started noticing and now I can't stop noticing, Stephanie. And it almost like becomes more like the things that were invisible before become like the subtleties of them become more apparent, like things that I couldn't see before, now I'm seeing, and catching on to things faster. I have a question for you. So one of the things that I've seen, and I like what you're speaking to about thought and the mental level and then the energetic level, because when I'm talking about thought, I'm talking about the energy of creation, the energy of thought, the force that creates our realities, that allows us to see. And it can be confusing because one of those forms that it takes is personal thinking, like that actually appears in my mind that I may be aware of or even unaware of, personal thinking. But it's a force that's there. So it's an energy that's moving through us. And what I've seen in people who become aware of the fact that their thought is creating their reality. So now I want to control it all. And like what I see is trying to like, oh, I have this thought. I can't have this thought. And that's like, don't think of a pink elephant. I'm thinking of a pink elephant. Don't, like what you're saying, I don't want this. I don't want this. Well, that's exactly what I'm focusing on, right?
Yes.
So what do you see in that, or how do you help people when they start to get scared because they notice that they're having a thought that is fearful or angry, and they don't want to create their world with it, and they know that that's how they create their world? What do you suggest, or how do you talk about that?
That's a really, really good question. And someone said, and I can't remember, so I can't attribute it, that the longest journey is from the mind to the heart. And so the truth is that we are all of it. Like, we are the gamut of emotion, and to deny parts of ourselves or to avoid. I was involved with a spiritual community back 20 odd years ago, and I did a lot of, like, they kept saying to me, you've got to surrender. That's the biggest gift you can give, is to surrender. And trust me, Stephanie, I tried to surrender strategically for 3 years. Every single day I practiced to surrender. But you know what? You can't strategically do that. It just happens. So it has to come from pride of mind. And people think that surrender is actually this really nice thing that you do. It's actually when you throw your hands in the air, you might even say a profanity, and you go, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. That's actually true surrender, because you relinquish all of that control. You just say, no, I'm not doing this. And sometimes you even throw your hands in the air. Sometimes you shout at the sky. So when I'm working with my client, I saw something on Facebook that was called the shaman's tap. So the thing is that when you're in your head, you're trying to control your life. That's what you're talking about, is, oh no, I can't have that thought, I want to have that thought. Can't have that thought, want to have that thought. The thing that you need to do is actually get out of your head. And so you put your 3 longest fingers together and you tap 3 times on your heart, and something physical happens in your body and you drop down. It's kind of like, they call it the secret, the shaman's secret, because they tap and it gets them into their beingness. And I'll tell you what, it works. You just drop in and you forget about the mind chatter and you're in your present. Do you stay in there? That depends. You can flip back up into your head, into your thoughts. So you just come back and do the tap, come back into your beingness. So it's about establishing neural pathways that are going to help you drop into your beingness. And that can be the shaman's tap. It could be, like for me, into getting out of the head or the mind or the thoughts and into my beingness. I take photos of flowers. Like, that's my thing. And people say, oh my God, Julie, your flowers are so beautiful. I can feel them. And that's because you can feel my beingness in the flower. That's the frequency we've blended like that. And so to take a macro photo of a flower that's really crisp and clear, you actually have to be still inside. And flowers will respond to your energy. So if there's not a skerrick of breeze and you move really close to a flower, it will start moving. And then when you still yourself, the flower will still, it will match your resonance. And then you can take a photo that is crisp and clear and it holds the frequency of that stillness. And that's what people see and feel in my photos. But there's a whole bunch of things that happen before that photo gets taken. So if I feel like I'm in my head, which can happen, like we've got to live in this world, as in the physical world. But if I feel like that's too jagged, I'll just get up from whatever I'm doing and I'll go outside and I'll take some photos. And in 5 to 10 minutes, I've stilled my being and I'm back into that state of equanimity. Now, I'd really like to talk about that. In that spiritual journey that I had, I learned that that which I avoid chases me. That which I seek is forever elusive. Yeah? So what happens is people are bouncing between seeking and avoiding, and in one hand they're getting chased by that which they don't want, and the other hand they're just not able to grasp what they're seeking. So what my practice for the last 20 odd years is that state of equanimity. It's that middle line. It's the not seeking and not avoiding. And when you're in that space, the experiences are magical because you're not striving to attain. You're not even striving to hold on to the magical experience. And that's how you know that you're in your beingness, because there's no seeking and no avoiding, because they have resonance that the world responds to. Does that make sense?
I have another thought as well around the chatter, like the mind chatter that sometimes comes to us. And it's a thing that we've been, I guess, playing with, exploring, having conversations about between Mum and I, is the more that you become connected to the collective, like the more that you're kind of connecting in, the more like thoughts drift in that aren't actually yours, that may actually belong to the other people that you're connected in with. And so as they come in, because we've been trained to take ownership of the thoughts that are coming into our mind, we're like, well, that must be mine. And so then we're like, okay, well, what do I do with that? But as someone that has always been very sensitive, there's constantly a lot of emotions and a lot of thoughts that come through me that I've now trained myself to go, does that actually belong to me? Like, is that mine? And more now, usually 100% of the time, it's not mine. And if it's not mine, then either I return to sender or I just allow it to pass through. Like that, just because a thought comes in doesn't mean that it has to always be like held onto and examined. Like it can just be allowed to pass through. And I think the more that we try and hold on to them and look at them and really go, well, why are you there still? I didn't want to be having these thoughts anymore. Then the more we kind of ingrain them and we strengthen the neural pathway of it. Whereas if we just allow them to be and to pass through, like the more peaceful we can be about it, and that it's not who we are. It's not how we identify ourselves. They're just thoughts that pass. So whether they're ours or the other collective people that we're connected to, they can just be and pass through.
Yeah.
I have been.
You go. Oh. You go, Stephanie.
Thank you. I have been. It's been very helpful to think of myself like a room, like this empty room, this space that is Stephanie. I call it the space of consciousness that is Stephanie. And that the things that move through me, the experiences, which, we can call thought, some of them are personal thought, the feelings, the sensations, even the experiences that move through me, they're moving through me. They're not me. I'm the space, right? Like I'm that space that's experiencing it. And so it seemed to me more and more that a few years ago, I started asking that too, like, is this mine? And getting a lot of times, no. And I was like, huh? What? I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought it was all mine, right? And now it seems to me like, oh, it was never mine because it's never been me. Our thoughts are never us. They can really look like it, and a part of our personality and ego identity that is really useful for getting stuff done in this human existence is made up of thought that we use to reinforce this thing called identity that also doesn't exist. It's like that isn't what I really am. And it's like not having to get rid of it, but knowing that there's the space. And I'm not saying I live there. I do not live there. Sometimes it's, catch me in a moment of blame and, okay. That happens. Yeah. But the more that I see myself that, like, it's really helpful and I'm not getting as caught in the tangled web of thought as we can of I need to get rid of this. I don't want this. And it moves like weather through the room. And it has to, because it's constantly changing, right? Like you're talking about energy, vibration. It is the stuff that we're made of, this stuff of the universe or this God stuff. It is. But the form that it takes in this energy of thought is constantly moving and changing. And so there's something reassuring for me about even just knowing that or remembering it when I can, which is not always. I like that, the idea of like, I felt it popping in and out, like, yep, I know that. Pop in, pop out, pop in, pop out. It's like, even in a course of a conversation, I may be, present and then a little less present and then more present and then less present. And like, okay, it's not a thing unless I make it into a thing.
Yes. Unless we ascribe meaning to it.
Yeah.
And we're meaning making machines. As I did a breakthrough therapy conference, and it was all about like the meaning that you ascribe to it. We're meaning making machines. We want to put meaning on everything, but it doesn't mean that there is meaning in that. and it really is just a story that we're telling ourselves.
So
We can
useful
tell
to
a different
remember.
Yeah, we just tell ourselves a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A good story. If we can tell any story, why not tell a good one?
Yeah. So I see thoughts as, I see us as transmitters and receivers, a bit like the tower. So the tower transmits the radio signals. You have the DJ in the studio and he's doing his thing by speaking or playing records or interviewing somebody. And then that goes to the radio tower, and then it's transmitted, and it might go to another radio tower and keeps being transmitted. So you could have like CBS radio in the US could be transmitting all over the US, and radios in people's houses are tuning into that frequency, and then they can hear that voice that was in that little room where he's playing his records. So we're all like that tower, but we're also like the radio in the room. So we're transmitting, all our thoughts are being transmitted, but we are also receivers, and we're receiving the thoughts that are in the air. Like, we don't see the radio waves that are going from tower to radio. They're not visible with the human eye, but man has created a device that records those radio waves. And if you're not tuned in enough, then you get that static that you talked about early in our conversation. So how do I determine in an instant that's not my thought? I know because I can be doing something and concentrating on doing a task, and this random thought drops into my mind that is completely contrary to what I'm actually doing in my beingness. And then I go, wow, that's interesting. And if I follow that, that's interesting, then I could reach out to that person that dropped in and go, are you thinking X, Y, Z? They actually look like they've had the biggest shock of their life, because I'm hearing their thoughts and I'm articulating it back to them. But it also can be a way that you know what to act on next, because you're in the collective soup, if you want to call it soup. And if you know what your thoughts are and what the random ones are that are dropping in, you could be being given information for the next step in your life, the next step for you to take. And if they're thoughts that you go, that's so not my stuff, I'll return it to sender, and it goes away, then you know for sure that it's just that your radio receiver got caught up in that transmission. And you can do what Tash has just suggested, let it pass all the way through, and then it goes and you don't hear it or think it. And the people that we're closer to, we're more attuned to their thoughts. So now I'll hear Tash's thoughts, but she lives 2 hours away by car. And then I'll think my answer, but then she'll message me and say X, Y, Z. And I'll go, didn't you get my thought? I responded to you. So we turn it into a little bit of a joke. But the reality is that's how the Indigenous cultures work. That's why they don't speak very much, because it's all through telepathy. So when we become aware of the fact that we are a receiver and a transmitter, we can hone that skill. We can amplify that skill. but there's a secret that you can't do it strategically. Yeah? So it has to be when you're in your being state. So it's not that you're practicing the art of telepathy, you're actually practicing the art of being. And then all those other things are a consequence of that, which is what you mentioned earlier, Steph. When you make a change here, there is a ripple impact through many other areas of your life. And so if you want to enhance the experiences of telepathy, of thought transference, of, you know, being aware of the universe at that very cellular or intimate level, then it's the practice of beingness, the practice of being you.
So I do with the telepathy sometimes with my husband. I'm like just thinking like, oh, can you just do this thing for me? But there's like almost a seeking of my energy and being into him and being like, just do this thing for me. And then he does, and I'm like, oh, just do the thing. And so then I'll come back into me, come back into my energy, and just like, wouldn't it be awesome if you could just do this thing for me? And then he will literally do it. And I'm like, what? That's wild. But there's like I think it's the seeking and avoiding like quality to it, that if my energy is seeking to have someone else do something or to get my thought, it doesn't work. But if I'm just in me and it's coming from my heart space, like my heart energy and awe and wonder, which I'll let Mum talk about, then it does happen. And so it's not it's being in out of polarity, like being in the middle of seeking and avoiding. And I just like playing with the seeking. Mostly, I rarely am doing the avoiding thing, but I do have a seeking energy because I'm inquisitive and curious. And so there's like a seeking quality to that sometimes, that if I just bring it back to me, then those things find me. Rather than me needing to go out and find them, they kind of are attracted in. And so there's this constant like practice of where in the seeking to beingness spectrum am I guess. You can talk about awe and wonder a little bit if you want one.
I've learned that when I guess ask for something to be manifested in my life, when I come from the perspective of awe and wonder, and it's not like there's such a distinction between the strategic mind and the heart mind. So it's when I'm in my heart and I'm like the 5-year-old who's seeing the world as this magical place. And I go, I wonder what it would feel like to have that experience. But I don't think myself to say those words. It actually comes prior to mind. And I have excitement for the experience. And that's when as the witness, I'm observing, I'm using, I wonder. And like I manifested a car that matched all my criteria, but I know the moment it happened, I was sitting doing accounts, like numbers, and just suddenly this stillness came over me and I thought, I wonder what it would feel like to drive that silver car. And then it was gone. It came in and it went out. No word of a lie, within 2 hours, I got a phone call from my husband saying, here, talk to Anne, his boss. They had a silver car that had all my criteria for sale. And so we bought it. It matched everything. But 2 hours before, I had actually had the awe and wonder of being in that car before all those other external things came into being. Like 2 hours before, Frank didn't know that they had a car that matched my criteria. But because I had activated that, then all the other pieces of the tapestry all got put in place and the threads were pulled, and voila, we've got the car that I dreamed about. But I didn't dream it didn't do it strategically. There's a difference, and when you start to recognize the difference, it's like this enormous gap. And that's why I practice the art of being by taking the flower photos every day. Like, Frank just lets me be because he knows that's part of me centering and grounding myself and being in my wholeness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I find that it's such a beautiful experience to have, being in curiosity and wonder. What you're describing as awe and wonder. Whether it's about something specific or not, it just feels so rich and vibrant and creative. And just that in itself is mind expanding, is an invitation to creative beingness. It's like that wonder is like, hey, and I've started to more, when I'm present enough to do this, and it is happening just more automatically, like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen with this. I wonder who I will show up as today. Like, in this conversation, what will you talk about? Rather than having a plan, I'd rather show up and see and let it show itself to me and show up with life that way. I'm less and less interested in, I was just saying today, like, I don't want to drive my life anymore. I want to be used by life. I want to be lived by life and see what happens, because I think that, what I come up with in my little mind, that's cool, but it's based on what I've seen before. If something comes in from, as you're talking about, it drops in, that's different. Like, it's not just other people's thoughts or the energy, right? Like it's like, oh, well, that I've never thought, like, that's completely different. Or, that kind of thing. Like, that's really interesting to me to see, like, to allow myself to be available for that and see where that takes me.
Like, being a conduit for spirit is like that same experience, is opening yourself up to be used as a vessel for what needs to be brought into the world. Like, that's part of our work, is preparing people to be that conduit, that it is different than planning your work or planning your business or planning your life, that it's allowing the unfolding to occur and not going, okay, well, but where is that going to take me? It is that wonder and I love what you said, like, the show up and see rather than having a plan, like, just to show up and see. I love that. I'm like, I'm going to adopt all of these things that you just said. Like, I want to be lived by life. Like, that's just glorious, like that feeling of, well, let's just see where it takes me. Like, let's just play. Like, I think there's this tendency to take life too seriously, and they're like, it's serious business. They're like, no, like, we can be playful and like inquisitive and curious and just be childlike in our exploration of the world. Like, we can still do that as adults. We don't need to lose that quality once we get into the real world and have to live a grown-up life. Like, I just love be lived by life so much.
Oh, good. I do too. And I don't even know exactly what that means or what that looks like, but I'm beginning to, because I'm showing up with it differently. I'm showing up with life differently. And I'm surprised and delighted. Instead of predicting what's going to happen, making expectations and assumptions, like, everything can be new and fresh. Everything can be if I show up with it that way, because that's what's being created in me, right? That's inevitably what I will see. And
Absolutely.
across the whole spectrum of experience. So we don't have too much time left, but I wanted to touch on your Lightcode Oracle cards, which are so cool. And that's like, when I found that was, I was like, oh, this is cool. So can you tell me just at least a little bit about what's going on with that and like what that is?
Absolutely. So in terms of what light codes are, I like in the community, I don't know. Like, I was introduced to it by my spirit team because there was a whole process. I needed to do a logo, and I knew a girl that did light code logos. Like, oh, I'd love it if she could do our logo. And I am a graphic designer, but I liked the way that she did it. And then she wasn't taking clients. I was like, what? But I want one. How rude. And so I like to my spirit team that I'm quite, I have a co-creating, demanding relationship. And I'm like, well, you need to tell me how to do it then. Like, you need to show me because I want one and you're going to have to bring it through me. And so they did. And then the more I kind of just practiced doing them in our client sessions, Mum would do her clearing process. And we're like, ooh, they say there's a light code for that. And so then I would just design a light code. And I can't like rationally or logically tell you how they come to be because I have no idea. I see shapes in my mind and I just start like moving them on a page. So I'm a graphic designer, so I know how like elements work together, but they're not consciously put in place. I just ask where things need to go. And then I can feel when they're in the right spot or when they're slightly off. And then I can feel in my body when it's activated because it like just powers through me. And this deck of 50 light codes was a lot of energy to channel through. And it got a little overwhelming at times when I was doing a lot of them. But all of that energy was coming through me and into the cards. And I knew that I felt it. Like, I knew that when I was making them, I had that experience. But I don't know why, but I just assumed that that was just a thing I got to experience and other people wouldn't. But the feedback that we've been getting is that they're alive, like there's an aliveness to them, and that people are feeling things like tangibly in their body, energetically, from the cards. And I think that that's wild and extraordinary and not what I anticipated as a creator, because I was like the vessel for creation. I didn't set out consciously to create a product. The product kind of came through me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most fun way to do it. So they are like looking at beliefs, like mind things, but they're also working on the energetic side of it. So like the mind chatter quality, like the mental states that we have around things like our beliefs, like they exist. And so to not address that would do a disservice. But at the same time, a lot of systems don't address the energetic quality to those beliefs that are sitting there. So the cards are designed to do both, where you can either, like some people look at the clearing and the activation and they like, okay, I'm going to look at the words. Some people just look at the light code, like they pick one based on which light code they're being drawn to, and they don't even read the words. They just look at the light code. Some of our clients hold it because they're clairsentient, so they feel things very deeply, and so they hold the cards and they put it on their body and they feel where it's doing work on their body. The different ways that people are using them, I think, is amazing, because they're not like other oracle cards. Like, they weren't designed that way, because I don't tend to use a lot of oracle cards, but you know, when you're asked by spirit to create something, you create it. And so I did, and I love them. Like, I use them as a deck in a way that I've never really used cards, because sometimes you can't like articulate what's going on. Like you just know that you're feeling a certain way, but you can't put words to that. And sometimes putting words to it means that we can shift it and shift out of that energy. Like I'm clairvoyant, so I see things. So it's almost like there's a tangle of threads around a certain thing that we're feeling. And it's unraveling the threads so that we can see it and there's space around it. And so the light codes kind of untangle and unravel so that things can bubble up to be addressed. And yeah, that's kind of the current body of work that we've been doing last year and a bit.
And I think, Tash, you described the light code like a QR code that it holds information. And
so a QR code holds information. The light code holds the energetic frequency. And like so the words, the clearing and the activation have been programmed into the light code to activate, to clear and activate.
It's cool. It's like, and it makes sense to me that, I mean, I know the power of presence, like just being with someone who is embodying a certain energy is transmissive by its very nature, it's communicating something very powerful. So, I mean, I know that of people, but when you create an intentional object like that, especially with who knows what technologies went into it, right? Like, I don't know, but I'm aware that these things, it's like everything is energy, right? So it has that energy and it can have that same effect of presencing or clarity, clearing, or something that's really pretty cool. And plus it's just fun. It's like I think it lends itself to that creative use that you're talking about. Like some people put it on their bodies, some people read it, some people look at it, some people, will randomly pull something and, and use it for whatever kinds of reflection, because it just is another tool, another way for us to create that thing, that experience and clarity within ourselves.
Yes.
It's really cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much. I think there's so many other things I'd love to talk with you about. But if someone's listening and they'd like to learn more about your Lightcode Oracle cards or the work that you're doing or anything like that, like where's the best place for them to find you?
But we've got something really special that we'd like to share with your community, and they can go to lightcodelab.com/Stephanie.
And there'll be some special goodies waiting for them there?
Special goodies.
There will be some special goodies.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. That's so amazing. And thank you for sharing what you're seeing and, being curious in conversation with me. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining me for today's Wildspire conversation. If you'd like to receive a weekly Wildspire email from me filled with inspiring stories, unmarketing experiments, tips for playing your way to impact and income without the hustle and hype, insights from my spiritual business journey, and more, go to theawakenedbusiness.com/Wildspire. Until next time, may you know yourself as the gorgeous wild creation you are.